Hello there and welcome to Folk-a-Dilly Tales. Every week we will be here to tell you some crazy stories, some amazing poems, accompanied by some fantastic songs. My name is John Hales and I will be your host. This week we have Chris Richardson, who's a great storyteller, and he's going to tell you all about the Pedlar of Swafham.
The Pedlar of Swafham, a very famous tale of East Anglia, a tale that actually has echoes all around Europe, but we like to think this version is our version and the best version. It goes back to the days of the first Tudor kings. There was a young man called John Chapman. And actually, in early life, he was a very lucky man. His father, when he died, he bequeathed to him a little homestead with strong walls, a thatched house, a little field to grow crops in, and a meadow where he could feed his pigs and his cows, and also a lovely little garden in which there grew an apple tree. And in springtime, that apple tree, its boughs were full of the most beautiful blossoms. And then, when the autumn came, those same boughs were heavy with fruit, and they were sweet, sweet, sweet apples. And John was told by his father always to give thanks to the Lord, his God, for all of those things that were good. And so every Sunday, without fail, he would go to church and he would pray. But alas, as it seems in most of the stories that I tell, somewhere something goes wrong and sadness comes in. And for John, at first, the crops in his field failed. And he found that he had to sell the field to get money to eat that year. But the walls on his cottage were still strong, but now they began to leak a little wind as it blew, and that lovely thatch roof, a little water would seep in. But still John would go to church every Sunday and he would pray for all those great things that he had in his life. But then the next year came, and this next year his cow and his pigs died. And in order to find things to eat, John had to sell that meadow. And now the wind was blowing a little harder through the walls of his cottage, and the rain dripped a little more incessantly through that thatch roof. But still John went to church every Sunday, and he prayed for all those things that were still good in his life. But then the next year came, and even that apple tree, the one that had been so fair and good to him all these years, began to wither, and the flowers were few, and the apples that did grow were still sweet to the taste, but they were small and few of them. And now John found that he had to become a peddler in order to make money to eat. He had to go to people's houses and mend their chairs, sell them new copper plates, and sell them the cheap songbooks of the day. And those roads of Norfolk were paved with hard stones. But still, when John came back in the evening, he would find there were a few apples to eat. And even though now the east wind would howl through the gaps in his cottage walls, and the rain would pour through holes in his roof, he would still go to church every Sunday and pray to his God for all that was good in his life. But then, John started to have a dream. It was a strange dream, and he didn't know what it meant, but it always seemed as though he was making his way from his home, making his way down to London, and when he got to London, he would sit on the bridge, the old London Bridge, and he would wait because something wonderful was about to happen. But just as it was about to happen, John would wake up. Now at first, John thought, well, it's a dream. The dreams like this happen all the time. But then the next day, the same dream happened. And the next night, and the next night, and the next night, and still John did not believe. Until on the Sunday night, the dream stopped. And then the next night they began again, and John thought, this can only be a sign from my God, that the dreams have stopped for a day of rest, but they begin once again. Now I must take notice of these dreams. And so John packed up those few apples from his tree. He put them over his shoulder in a little knapsack, and he began that long road to London. Now, if he thought those roads of Norfolk were paved with hard stones, those roads to London were paved with even harder ones, and it was a long and tiring journey. But at last John made his way into London, and he found his way to London Bridge, and he found his way to that spot that he had seen so many times in his dreams. And he sat there and waited. And nothing happened that day. He slept there in the cold and the wet, and he waited all the next day, but still nothing happened. He slept again. Now the next morning, as John woke up, one of the shopkeepers from nearby came over to him and said, "What's your game, son? What are you doing, sleeping on this bridge time and time again? Are you eyeing up my shop? What scheme do you have in mind?" And John, being an honest man, he explained in honest terms why he was there, and the dream that he had that had brought him all this way to London and its bridges. And the man, he scoffed at John. He said, "And you came all of this way on just because you had a dream? I have had a dream myself, 7 nights at least. And in that dream, you wouldn't believe it, I dreamt of a poor garden with a withered apple tree. And then at the base of its roots, there was a pot full of gold, I ask you." But when he looked round, John was nowhere to be seen. And if John had made that way to London in 5 days, he made it home in 3. And he rushed back to his cottage. And he rushed to the apple tree, and he took out an old rusty spade, and he started to dig away at its roots. And sure enough, he found a little clay jar. And he took off the top of that clay jar, and inside there were 2 golden coins. 2 golden coins, thought John. Well, it's not exactly a fortune. It'll feed me for a month. But I must save the other coin for the church as my tithe. I must give thanks. Remember what I always promised my father. And so he took that clay jar and he took it to the church. And he offered that coin to the priest there, who took it very, very thankfully, for the church in those days was in very poor repair in Swafham. But the priest, he saw the clay jar that John was carrying, and he said, "John, what's that? I see some writing on the clay jar." And John showed him. What does it say? It's in Latin. It says, "Like all good things, I stand on the shoulder of giants." And once more, as the priest turned round, John was nowhere to be seen. For John was running back to his house. And once more he took out that rusty spade. And once more he dug, and sure enough, below where he had dug before, there was not one small clay jar, but 2 great clay containers, and each one brim full with golden coins. More than enough to give him a long and happy life, but also enough to give to the church which had led him to his fortune. And so John took that second jar to the church, and with the monies that came from it, there was enough to rebuild that church of Swafham. And if you go there today, you will find John listed as one of its greatest benefactors. And John, yes, he did live a happy life. And what became of the apple tree? But with all those clay jars taken out from its roots, suddenly what was withered began to flourish and grow once more. The blossoms came, the apples came, and still they were sweet, sweet, sweet.
A Pedlar's Dream. In Swafham town a pedlar lived, inside a ruined house with just a teapot and a mouse. And he would dream of riches far beyond his fantasies, so vivid he believed them true. He'd walk to work 100 miles and tease the folk with wares and smiles, and he'd be weary for a while. He'd carry goods of many kinds, silk ribbons laced with him you'd find, so much joy and peace of mind. The pedlar walked to London town to follow his calling, where he waited 3 whole days. He stood on London Bridge till the early hours each morning, but no treasure could be found. He'd walk to work 100 miles, and tease the folk with wares and smiles, and he'd be weary for a while. He'd carry goods of many kinds, silk ribbons laced with him you'd find, so much joy and peace of mind. A salesman came to say hello. I've watched you now, I need to know, why do you wait by London Bridge, every day right here by the water's edge? The pedlar laughed as he wiped his brow. I had a dream and believed somehow that if I came to London town I'd go back home with my fortune found. So the salesman looked and shook his head. I can't believe what you just said. I'm plagued by dreams myself, he cried. Each night they'd come and the salesman sighed. I dreamt a pot of gold I'd find. In Swafham town it waits and hides. Next to the ruins it is guaranteed, under the shade of an apple tree. The pedlar ran so fast his legs could barely carry him, and finally was home. He dug a hole so large under the great big apple tree. 'Twas there he found his pot of gold.
A pedlar lived in Swafham town inside a ruined house first his legs could barely carry him, and finally he was home. He dug a hole so large under the great big apple tree. 'Twas there he found a pot of gold. He'd walked to work 100 miles and teased the folk with wares and smiles, and he'd be wearied for a while. He followed all his dreams. He'd carry goods of many kinds, silk ribbons laced with him. You'd find happy faces left behind. Follow all those dreams. He'd walk to work 100 miles and tease the folk with wares and smiles, and he'd be wearied for a while. He followed all his dreams. He'd carry goods of many kinds, silk ribbons laced with him. You'd find happy faces left behind. Dreams, they may seem unreal, but they can come true if you believe that they do. Dreams, they may seem unreal, but they can come true if you believe that they do. Dreams, they may seem unreal, but they can come true if you believe that they do.
Next week, the legend of the Doulahan. Folk-a-Dilly Tales is a Zingaro Blue production. It was written, produced and edited by Mario and Lesley Price. Mixed by Frank Erlenkämper. The poems, lyrics and songs are also written by Mario and Lesley Price. My name is John Hales and I've been your host. Our storyteller this week was Chris Richardson. The contents of this podcast are based on the book Folk Stories, Legends and Poems by Mario and Lesley Price and are available as a book and an e-book from Amazon under the name Folk Stories, Legends and Poems. The music can be found under that same name and as volumes 1 and 2 streaming on all major platforms. Today's background music was supplied by Scott Buckley. You can find the link to these compositions in the comments below. Be sure to check out our music videos that tell some of our stories on YouTube. For more information about Zingaro Blue, visit our website at www.zingaroblue.co.uk or find additional links in the comments section. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please hit the follow button so that you can listen to the next episode of Folk-a-Dilly Tales. Thanks for listening.